probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's up, y'all? I'm Bud Elliott, and this is another episode of my Cover 3 College Ball Podcast Summer School Series. Let's preview Illinois today. And to do that, I'm going to the Illini Inquirer because it's just an awesome site. My co-host Tom Fernelli's always texting me, hey, did you see what Jeremy and those guys wrote? Dude, I think we're going to be pretty good this year. I mean, he's all in on it. I'm all in on it. Jeremy, how you been, man?
Doing well, bud. I always look forward to this, kind of get caught up and kind of reset my brain because I'm such in the micro of who they're going to add at this position that I kind of get to zoom out a little bit and focus on what this Illinois football team and program are.
Absolutely. So last year was frustrating, challenging, kind of pick whatever verb we want. Like the team I thought was, by my ratings, it certainly was not as good as the prior year's team, but it also had a little bit of bad luck in some of the close games that maybe had things gone their way. They could have continued their bowl streak, unfortunately falling, to 5-7. Let's start on the positive though. Where is this team in your mind clearly better than it was last year?
Well, I think when you look at Illinois, they kind of figured out the quarterback position, which this was one of the worst quarterback teams in the country for a long period of time. I mean, under Lovie Smith, besides Rutgers, I don't think there was a worse Power 5 team when it came to quarterback play. Last year, Luke Altmaier, I know he had some early growing pains. We kind of all expected that through 4 interceptions against Penn State. But his last 6 or 7 starts, 10 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, completion rate of 65%, led the Big Ten in scramble yards among quarterbacks. So I thought he really proved himself as a playmaker. And then he gets hurt. John Paddock comes in as the heater of all heaters for backup quarterbacks and almost leads Illinois back to a bowl game. So with Altmaier coming back for a second season, I think he'll improve some of those areas that you need to get from experience, which is just, hey, I need to make quicker decisions. Hey, I need to get the ball out and maybe lead my receivers open rather than waiting for them to come open. I think all those kind of, aggressiveness kind of questions, I think that's what he's got to address next. But he's a playmaker, and I think they have a bowl capability with him at quarterback. And then Devin Leary's younger brother, has really come on, and the staff's really impressed with him that he can be that backup guy. They've just kind of, but they've raised the floor of this program. And I think the offensive line, they went out and addressed depth, which was a major issue early in the season for them. Offensive line played good at the end of the year, but they really lacked a 6th, 7th, 8th guy that they can really count on. Now they feel like they have a real 2 deep now 4 years into this program. So I think they've really elevated the offense the last couple of years. They have more playmakers. They actually had a wide receiver draft pick in Casey Washington for the first time since A.J. Jenkins in 2012. And they have some playmakers at running back that just got hurt last year, but now they're healthy. I just feel like under Barry Loney going into year 3, that this can be an offensive-driven team, which has not been the case for Illinois in quite a while. So I think this team can score points, and building on a year 3 of an offensive coordinator that's had success here and a quarterback who proved himself last year. I think there's some promising stuff on that side of the ball.
You mentioned the loss of the receiver to the NFL. Who should we expect to step up at that spot?
Pat Bryant is a guy who's got number 1 potential. The last 2 years, he's got more than 1,000 yards receiving, had 7 touchdowns last year. It's just inconsistency. He dropped several passes that hit his hands at Minnesota that kind of cost Illinois for a while until Paddock came in and saved the day. But he's shown that he's a capable number 1 wide receiver, has the potential to be it. Now he just needs that consistency. But Illinois has some intriguing young talent at that position. Malik Elzy is a former 4-star prospect. He's had some drop issues in his first year and then again during the spring game, but he's 6'3", 200 pounds, really can go up and get the ball. So he's that big physical presence that I think can help replace Casey Washington. But in the slot, it's going to be hard to replace Isaiah Williams, but who's a former quarterback who ended his career just 3 years as a wide receiver. Became the 2nd leading receptions guy in Illinois history. Was an all Big Ten first team receiver next to Marvin Harrison Jr. last year. So who's going to be that playmaker? Kanari Wilcher, a sophomore, has speed that they really need. Hank Beatty's more the crafty, skilled hands guy in the slot. And then they added a JUCO All-American and Mario Sanders. So there's going to be a big competition at that position. They also lost Tip Ryman, a 3rd-round pick at tight end, which was a big surprise. Wasn't a big receiver at Illinois. Didn't have a lot of production there. But they brought in an FCS All-American in Cole Rusk out of Murray State, an Illinois kid. And then Carson Godo was a late Division II transfer. He's a D2 All-American. So they've added a little bit more a dynamic receiving ability at that position.
I mean, I look at this O-line, 320, 3.25, 290 at the center. We'll allow it. 335, 305. Illinois set up to mash people this year?
I think their offensive line has been one of the biggest improvements of the offseason. That's saying something, given you just had two guys go to the NFL. Julian Pearl was a starting left tackle the last 2 years, signed an undrafted free agent deal. Isaiah Adams, the third-round draft pick last year, was better as a junior because he played his natural position guard, had to move to tackle because Zy Chrysler wouldn't cut it at tackle. But they have really upgraded. J.C. Davis is the biggest transfer addition that they made until maybe Terrence Brooks at corner, which I'm sure we'll get into. But the kid out of New Mexico is a plug and play left tackle. I thought PFF thought could have been like a 6th or 7th round draft pick last year. Illinois, I think, went under the radar and landed a guy that I think has all Big Ten NFL draft potential, left tackle, like for a premium position. I think that was a huge addition. Then they added 3 more transfers. Melvin Priestley's an East St. Louis kid, comes from Grambling State. He's now the front runner for the right tackle job. They love his athleticism and power, a little undersized, but they think he has the physical tools to make up for it. Kevin Wigginton, who started games at Michigan State last year, hasn't even won the job yet. Josh Geske, who's a returning starter, is starting at guard right now. Zy Chrysler returns for a 3rd year. And then Josh Kreutz, who really elevated himself. Olin Kreutz's son, I think a lot of people know that, former Chicago Bears great. He was a really solid starter last year, and they expect him to improve, but he's become kind of the leader of that group. They added 2 more JUCO kids on the offensive line, and Desmond Schuster was out last year, and Kellen Francis. They like Brandon Henderson, a sophomore. So they have had struggles of that guy 5 and 6. Brett Bielema had NFL players on the offensive line, but they really feel like if they have an injury or somebody struggles, they actually have guys who can come in and play well. So I do think it'll be a strength. I did think it was going to be a strength last year, and it wasn't for the first half of the season, but I think they have the depth to overcome those things. And I just think J.C. Davis was a monster ad.
All right. Not an Illinois fan, but I do watch a lot of Illinois games, obviously. Please, for the love of God, tell me the secondary is better this year than it was last year. Like we knew it was going to be worse because they lost all those dudes in the NFL after the 22 season, but they got some injuries during the season. That was at times a little difficult to watch. I'm sure for Illinois fans, much more than me.
It was the biggest misstep, I think, for the staff last offseason, was thinking that they had the talent internally to replace Devin Witherspoon, Sidney Brown, Quan Martin, top 70 draft picks, and one guy who was a Pro Bowler in his rookie year in Devin Witherspoon. But Taz Nicholson led the country in penalties. He was a good cover guy, but led the country in penalties. Then they had a bunch of youth on the cornerback spot opposite them, had some injuries that exposed even more youth. At safety, Matthew Bailey, they expected to replace Sidney Brown, and Matthew Bailey had a phenomenal freshman year, but he only played 20 snaps. His impact was clear against Penn State. When he played 20 snaps, he was much better, and the team was much better. But then they had to go to some FCS transfers that they got in Clayton Bush and Nicario Harper. Miles Scott was a converted wide receiver, playing free safety for them all of last year. So they added a couple JUCO guys last year, but that just did not cut it, bud. And that their defense is all about press man coverage so we can be super aggressive in our front, and we can blitz the heck out of people, make college quarterbacks uncomfortable. I love that. After watching Lovie Smith for 5 years and just sit back in zone and letting college quarterbacks figure out where I'm going with the ball before the ball is even snapped, Ryan Walters brought this aggressive, multiple defense that just put all this pressure on quarterbacks. They couldn't do that as much last year because they couldn't trust their corners and their secondary to cover. But I will give them credit. They have gone out and they have addressed that this offseason. Terrence Brooks out of Texas is one of the most significant transfer additions they have made. 4-star former prospect, top 100 prospect, a top 110 transfer on the market. They beat USC and Michigan for him, bud. So I think Illinois and Brett Bielema have kind of gone for the under the radar guys in the portal. They went out and got a big fish, and they needed it at this position. And then they got even more depth with Torrey Cox Jr., son of a former NFL player, as is Terrence Brooks, to give him another nickel, another cornerback to add to Xavier Scott, who was good in his first year as a starter. And I think Matthew Bailey coming back healthy could be good. So they will be better, bud. But the question is how much better, because that is a very important question, because it was terrible last year. It needs to at least be competitive to good. this year.
And in the run fits too. I mean, that Kansas game, I was like multiple times, just okay, a little orbit motion here, handoff, nobody home, like nobody on the TV screen. Like this is Tom ain't gonna be happy as far as episode, man.
Made them miss Sidney Brown. Like Sidney Brown, like we talked about Devin Witherspoon, Sidney Brown being in the middle of that defense. They missed that guy last year, and that's supposed to be Matthew Bailey. So we'll see if he can be that guy.
All right, who is and the answer may just be J.C. Davis, but who is a sneaky guy that let's fast forward 7 weeks from now, we're in Indianapolis. Can we get media days moved to Chicago? I think I'd rather go to Chicago than Indy, by the way. But we're in Indianapolis for Big Ten media days. This guy doesn't get voted first or second team all Big Ten, but you standing around with the Illinois media scrum, you're like, you know what? He may prove everybody wrong and actually be on that postseason team.
Two guys I want to mention because they lost so much talent up front in the defensive line, Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph, even Denzel Jackson, the nose tackle. I got questions about their defensive line. They've added some transfers in Gentle Hunt, and Dennis Briggs Jr. is a really interesting guy.
Is he finally healthy?
He is, but
Good,
you know about Dennis Briggs more than me, so you could probably talk to
him. We're both from Orlando. This is so long ago. We were on the same flight to the opening. Back like we haven't had the opening in 6 years maybe for out of Oregon out at Nike. So no, he was always a good kid. That the chop block that he got hit with by the red jersey, it's either Louisville or NC State, was complete nonsense. Like it was just dirty as hell. And I was just really wondering if he was ever going to get back healthy, because he was actually pretty damn good when healthy.
That's it. When he's healthy, he's been very productive. Had a phenomenal spring. They're really high on what he can bring. Gentle Hunt, a kid from Florida A&M that they really like, really undersized, but good at everything else. So they'll be interesting to watch them. Anichi Sledge out of Auburn, a nose tackle. But their outside linebackers are probably the best defensive players they have. Two guys with NFL potential. Seth Coleman, who was as good as any pass rusher in the Big Ten the last 6 weeks of the season. But the first 6 weeks, he was kind of not there. We don't know where he was. Gabe Backus had a phenomenal freshman year. It was a great ad. They have kept him from going to an SEC program despite some overtures behind the scenes, but he is a big, strong, physical guy. Maybe not as twitchy as Seth Coleman, but Gabe Backus, they need those guys to take the next step because their defensive line probably not going to be as strong on the interior, but they need those guys on the edge to step up. And I do think having good cover guys, having better coverage can help Aaron Henry, the defense coordinator, his second year, didn't have a great first year after replacing Ryan Walters. That could maybe let him be more aggressive with his blitz packages and maybe open up some things for those guys.
What is the most impactful or intriguing position battle that Illinois will have this fall?
Ooh, that's a good question. The one I'm kind of sitting on this, we're kind of waiting on this, so this might not age, but I'm interested to see if Illinois gets Zachary Franklin out of the transfer portal, who had great success at UTSA under Barry Lunny Jr. So the fit makes sense. He knows the offense, just a big, strong, physical guy. But I do think that wide receiver position, if they don't get Franklin, is really intriguing because Pat Bryant's going to start, but Malik Elsie's probably got the first chance to win the job opposite him on the perimeter. But Colin Dixon's a kid they really like that they flipped from Wisconsin after their coaching change. Ashton Hollins is about a 6'5", really lanky, fast kid that they think could add another kind of dimension to them. Alex Kapka-Jones was a JUCO ad that's long and kind of make plays down the field. But that slot position is really intriguing to me because that was the engine of their offense. 2 years ago, it was Chase Brown. Last year, it was Isaiah Williams as the engine of that offense. Now you don't have a guy that's going to get 80 touches to 100 touches there. How do Kanari Wilcher, Hank Beatty, Mario Sanders, that competition for that playing time is going to be really interesting because that's basically an offshoot of your run game is some of those screen passes to those guys.
So the schedule is both good and bad, I think. Like you dodge Ohio State, but you do have to play Oregon, Michigan, and Penn State. But there's sort of a fellow orange and blue vibe to this, like that I saw with Auburn, who we actually recorded earlier today. And that's the toughest games you have, the games that you're probably not going to win, whether you play them home, away, or like on the moon, are indeed on the road, which means you get a more winnable game at home. And on the flip side, the Big Ten has, at least per my power ratings, given Illinois 5 of the worst 6 teams in the conference on their slate. So it feels like a more of a narrow, defined range of potential outcomes, assuming Illinois does kind of bounce back, and that you should make a bowl game, I think, against this slate with all those winnable ball games. What's like the most important thing they need to do to make sure that they do get back to a bowl?
For me, it's the defense has to take a huge step forward. This is the year we got to learn a lot about Aaron Henry as a defense coordinator. Last year was his first year. When they hired him, it was kind of a bet on the future. You knew you'd go through some growing pains maybe, but I always thought Brett Bielema, a defensive guy who's had an unbelievable run of defensive coordinators in his time, going back to Dave Doran, Chris Ash, Ryan Walters, like all these guys that have gone on to be head coaches. Aaron Henry has that potential because he's really bright guy, really inspirational leader. But first year didn't go well. And I think the offense will be good. I think it's going to be very competitive. And Brett Bielema has been in a lot of competitive games. And that's the one thing he's brought to Illinois is Illinois is not getting blown out. Every game they have a chance to go in and compete. Like that is a huge step forward for Brett Bielema. But they got to win more of those games. And the defense has to help close some of these out that they didn't last year. So you're right. Like I know the Big Ten gets deeper, but for Illinois, Northwestern and Purdue are still on the schedule every year. Like you got to start winning those games more often. They have against Northwestern. They haven't against Purdue. They need to beat Purdue, and they got them at home this year. You have Michigan at home. You're probably going to lose that. You go to Penn State, probably going to lose that. Kansas, I think, is a huge one early on, Bud, because that's a top maybe 25 opponent you're playing at home. Great chance to set a great mood for your program the rest of the year. Eastern Illinois, Central Michigan, like that. If you can get off to a 3-0 start, I think this team's going bowling. But at Nebraska, toss-up game in my opinion. I think Nebraska's getting better with their coaching staff. But at Oregon, probably a loss. But the back end, Minnesota, Michigan State at home, at Rutgers, at Northwestern. That's the season. That 4 games to me is the season. If you can get 3 of those, I do think Illinois should be a pretty good, have a great chance at a bowl game there. And you didn't get beat down with the schedule, in my opinion. Oregon and Penn State are difficult. Michigan's difficult, but I think Rutgers, Minnesota, Nebraska, those are all really winnable games.
Jeremy, really enjoyed the conversation as always, man. We'll be following you guys on the Illini. Jeremy, really enjoyed the conversation, man. As always, we'll be following you guys on the Illini Inquirer and looking forward to fall camp in the season.
Appreciate you, bud.